speaker tonight is noted author John Berry, perhaps best known in Louisiana for his book Rising Tide, which told the story of the 1927 flood and its effect on our state and our nation's history. It drastically changed the politics. More recently, I'm sure most of you have heard of John Berry because he served as a member of the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority. And in that capacity, he also served as a member of the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority until last year. We all know what happened. And under his leadership, the Protection Authority took the unprecedented step of suing almost 100 oil and gas companies over the unrepaired damage they've done to coastal wetlands. In He's here tonight to tell us about that and about the vision for the future of our state that his new organization, Restore Louisiana Now, is promoting. And before he gets started, I wanted to say that due to an oversight, there's no projector here tonight. However, his PowerPoint presentation will be on our Facebook page, and it's public. Anybody can go on it. So just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, and I want to, sorry, I missed your name.
Me? I'm Carson.
Carson. Carson loaned me his computer, so I'll stand in front and I'll hold it. I'd also like to recognize two people here, and there may be, I'm sure there are other scientists here, or maybe others, but Jane Turner at LSU, and Paul Kemp, who is, or was a colleague of mine when I was still on the board. Very glad to see both of you. And Gene Turner has really done probably the first work, maybe, I mean, you would know, but I know going back almost 30 years, if not 30 years, looking at this question in trying to quantify oil and gas. But going back even before that, even the Corps of Engineers has a 1973 report in which they talk about the certainty of land loss associated with oil and gas operations. There may be some stuff earlier than that I'm not familiar with. And we also have some news tonight that the president of the authority, of the Flood Protection Authority, Tim Duty, the governor just said he's rejecting both nominees, both Tim Duty and the other nominee from St. Bernard Parish, and is demanding that the nominating committee send him 2 more names. There's nothing in the law that allows him to do that. So we'll see a lot of court action probably over this. Anyway.
Could you speak really loud?
I could try, but I've got a bad cold, so
Okay.
I'll stand closer, but you want to go away. The Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority was formed after Katrina. It is a unique entity, although it's got a counterpart on the West Bank that at least nominally is the same, but doesn't seem to take the same leadership in a lot of things. Don't get me started on that, unrelated to this lawsuit, like the 2011 flood, but anyway. There is a nominating committee, which is comprised of representatives of engineering and scientific societies and deans of colleges of engineering and several good government groups. They send names to the governor, 2 names for each slot, and he has to pick one of those 2 names. As I said, there's nothing in the law that allows him to reject both and tell them to start over. And unlike the other boards, all the other boards and commissions in the state, once you're appointed and confirmed by the Senate, you do not serve at the governor's pleasure. We're supposed to have been insulated from politics. That allowed us to do what we did. The story of the lawsuit is pretty much, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about the board. It is a very good board. Past members have included one of the most respected engineers in the state, Larry McKee. In fact, somebody told me they named an award after him. Another engineer, the past president of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Paul's a leading coastal scientist. He's on it now. From North Carolina, University of North Carolina, we have the co-author of the most sophisticated storm surge model in the world. We did have, replaced with me, Ricardo Pineda, who was essentially the chief engineer for the state of California, overseeing 1,600 miles of levees. He was replaced by a lobbyist or sport fisherman. I think there was a little bit of fall off in institutional knowledge there. We have 4 members at least of the board and our executive director who routinely participate in national policy making or scientific groups. It was an all-star board. It's like looking at an all-pro team. And while the initial idea did come from me, the board, every colleague immediately grasped it. This has nothing to do with politics. I think our board is probably majority Republican. Probably the second, everybody on the board, or the former board, supports the suit. The second most vocal person on the board is a Tea Party guy who described himself to the press as a right-wing extremist. It's not right or left. It's what I tell Rotary clubs. It's basic American values. It's you keep your word, you obey the law, and you take responsibility for your actions. Now, there is no question scientifically whether or not oil and gas operations contributed to land loss. You can argue what the percentage is, but every scientific study, including ones done by the Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association and the American Petroleum Institute, concluded the same thing. Yeah, we did it. There's also absolutely no question that the overwhelming majority, almost all of the operations, were conducted under permits which explicitly required the companies to repair the damage when they were done. And since 1980 or 81, state law has pretty much said the same thing. And the companies haven't done it. I can, rather than just talk about this, also, nobody on the board, no one associated with the board has ever said it's all oil and gas. We know there are multiple causes. I personally was probably more responsible for injecting into the conversation about causes the dams on the upper Missouri River. And I mean, that was something that I kept beating on people repeatedly. And, I recognize it's not that just oil and gas. But it's also not just levees. An analogy that I've used is if you take a big block of ice out of the freezer and you stick it in the sink, and it's going to start to melt. That's a problem. The levees have created that problem because they're not replenishing that area with sediment. By the same token, maybe there are things you can do to deal with that problem. And maybe things like diversions can help accommodate that and control and things like that. What the oil and gas operations is like is if you take an ice pick and you start chipping away, chopping at that block of ice. You transform a problem, and a serious problem, not to dismiss it, but you transform that into an immediate crisis. And that's what the operations have done. Now, I don't know how well you can see this. I will send it so it'll be on the website. This is Delacroix in 1956. That's a little south of New Orleans. I guess probably about 25 miles south of New Orleans. This is last time this saw any sediment from the Mississippi River was in the 1927 flood. You can see in 1956 there's a lot of landmass here. This is 1965 with that one canal up in the corner was dredged in 1961, which incidentally was a dry hole. They never filled it in. So 65, you can see it's still plenty of land mass. You don't really see much difference between that and 56. This is 1972. Now you see the area around that first canal, which was never filled in, has really started to deteriorate. And you see a couple other canals They've also been dredged. Okay, now this is 1989. You see it started to fall apart. That's 2008.
Oh, the law.
Permit for this canal over here. Upon abandonment of the well location, well, I'll skip that, just read the red. The dredged material shall be returned to the canal or spread adjacent to existing marsh to create marsh and encourage vegetation. That's a permit. This is the law. This area shall be revegetated, detoxified, and restored as near as practicable to their original condition upon termination of operations. This well was abandoned in 1994. This canal was abandoned in 1994. This is 2008. Nothing's been done to it at all. Okay, we're back. That's the same slide. This is the same view from, the same place from, obviously not from Google Earth, but. So there are the 4 slides together.
56, 2008.
So that is not the impact of levees. Okay, now, Shell's former chief engineer for offshore operations was a guy named Bob B. Very well-known scientist, chair of the National Science Foundation team which investigated Katrina. And he won, he's now at, I guess probably Emeritus now at Berkeley, I would guess. But he, as I say, for about 20 years, he was Shell's chief offshore engineer, won many awards from the industry. In 2006, for an affidavit for the state of Louisiana, not for us, he said, clear evidence that past and current oil and gas activities have made and continue to make substantial contributions to degradations in the natural defenses against hurricane surges. All these works and activities have contributed significantly to the loss of natural defenses such as barrier, beaches, wetlands, and marshes. In several important cases, it was the loss of these natural defenses that contributed to the unanticipated breaches of flood protection facilities during Hurricane Katrina and led to repeated flooding during Hurricane Rita. Okay, so that's my last slide, so I'm going to close this. Did that. That's the limit of my technological expertise. Take my flash drive out. Thank you very much. And nobody disputes the role of oil and gas. Garrett Graves, the governor's coastal guy, who says, I'm the first one to say there's liability there. Well, then why are you against the suit? On December 4th, 2012, Tim Duty, the president of the Flood Protection Authority, I and our in-house counsel sat down with Garrett to give him a heads up on what we were planning to do. And he said, you know, actually we were kind of pleasantly surprised by what then seemed a muted response. You know, it was clear he didn't prefer that we not do it, but he didn't explode or anything like that. And we discussed the idea of saying no to Chris John, the former congressman who heads the Mid-Continent Oil and Gas, and saying to him, well, gee, maybe we should work something out. You know you guys did it. The industry admits it. You personally, Chris John, you recognize it. Why don't we work something out? And part because our goal, actually, the authority's goal was always a statewide solution. We only have legal jurisdiction to sue for, the legal authority to sue for our jurisdiction, but obviously it's a statewide problem, and in fact, less in our jurisdiction than it is elsewhere in the state, although there's plenty of problems in our jurisdiction. Garrett said, this is a direct quote, which I remember very, very vividly. I already tried that. They're not there yet. So here's the governor's coastal czar. He recognizes the industry's liability. He actually goes to them and tries to get them to do something about it, for which I have complimented him at a CPRA meeting. He's never contradicted me that he's done this. And they say no. So what are you going to do? Are you going to walk away with your tail between your legs? So for me, that was the clincher in going forward for the lawsuit. And, you know, we were all quite surprised, frankly, by the push. We certainly knew what we were doing was going to be controversial. But based on Garrett's response and the fact that we had given him, it's not like we briefed him every week on it, but he knew we were doing it. We reminded him several times that we were still, just because we hadn't done it didn't mean that we weren't doing it. He was specifically told in April. He was specifically told in early July. He was specifically told in mid-July. He was called the second we set a date for filing. I emailed him. So apparently my guess is he never told the governor. I don't know that for a fact, but based on the reaction, I think he never told the governor. And so we are where we are. You know, obviously I actually had a prepared talk, but I'm not, as you can tell, paying a lot of attention to it. I think I'm covering all or most of the points. What I really, I mean, with you all, with the Sierra Club, I kind of feel you don't need to have it explained to you, and I really rather spend more time answering questions. But I will say a couple more things. One is, maybe just one more thing, and then I'll answer the questions. Two more things. First, if you're a member of the Sierra Club, then you're an environmentalist. And even if you're here you know, because you're working for one of the defendant's law firms, they go to pretty much all, and nobody take that personally. There was nothing I said here I wouldn't say anywhere else. And that's not directed at Carson. It really isn't. I asked him that as a joke, and he said, well, he interned at one of them, but also interned at a firm working for us. Environmentalist in Louisiana, that is a tough position to be in. You know, you may gain a few small victories every now and then, but you don't get many big ones. You can win this fight. You can win this fight. But let me tell you something, it is a fight. I'm dressed like this because I was meeting with several state legislators who are actually going to vote with us, but we're trying to get them to stand up and take more of a leadership role. And it's hard. I'm not saying they're not going to do that, but it is hard. And it's hard even though we have every single fact on our side. And there's a killer fact, which we just, you know, in doing due diligence, is really very good lawyers. They went through all the fine print and the master plan, the annual plan. And here's something that we will haven't yet talked about because we're trying to track it down. But the master plan, the annual plan, they have state money going to close oil field canals. They have one canal that the state is planning to spend $39 million of your money to close. Is there something wrong there?
Yeah.
The most anti-tax governor in the United States is spending $39 million of your money to close a canal dug by an oil company? I don't get it. That's not good politics. It's not good politics for the governor. And it's not good politics for anyone who votes to kill the lawsuit. And because the arguments are so strong on our side, that's why we have and you have a chance to win. But it is going to take a lot of effort. And frankly, it's going to take money. I mean, we want to put what I just told you in an ad. It costs money to put an ad on the table. I formed this group, RestoreLouisianaNow.org. Got a nice donate tag on the website. I am not getting paid anything. I am living off savings for the last few months and until the legislature goes out in June. But the ads cost money. So, I mean, there's a plea. But even maybe more important than the ads is your personal involvement, you call your state senator and you go to his office, you go to your state representative's office and you tell him this is serious. The idea of killing a lawsuit, when these companies sign contracts saying they would close it, when the state law says they would close it, you know what their defense is? Well, they never made me do it. They think it's the state's fault because the state never enforced it. According to the EPA, Louisiana has, quote, the lowest enforcement rate, unquote. Lower than Oklahoma, which is the redder state, than Louisiana. Lower than Texas, another red state. Garrett talks about, we don't have authority, we didn't have the legal authority to file. Yeah, we did. That will be decided in court. But he starts throwing all sorts of stuff out there. He says the Shell plant decided not to Shell decided not to build its plant partly because of our lawsuit. Well, Shell didn't say that. What Shell said is the plant was supposed to cost $12.5 billion, but it was going to cost $20 billion. That's why they canceled. More importantly, Shell decided they weren't going to build such a plant anywhere in North America. So I'm not sure how the SLIPFA lawsuit affects their decision not to build a plant in Mexico. He just throws these things out. He says, I've got $17 billion for the coast. Well, yeah, he does if he counts the $14.5 billion already paid to build the levee system around Metro New Orleans. That's how he gets the $17 billion. I mean, it's just nonsensical, this stuff. And, I'm rattling on almost the way he does sometimes. But the last thing I'm going to say, which I have now started saying, I think I mentioned it the first time at one of the SLIPFA meetings, is somebody, and it might have been Paul actually, who asked me what my latest book, which was called Roger Williams, The Creation of American Souls, by Church and State, the Development of the Idea of Modern Individuals.
You got a microphone.
Wait, we may
Yeah.
not
You just
understand.
brought your microphone.
Oh, okay.
A little bit late. Thank you. Okay, so do I have to start from the beginning? Okay. Somebody asked me what my latest book had to do with this lawsuit. And my first response was, nothing. And I think that was, Paul, you asked me that question. And then I started to think about it. I thought, actually, it's got a very lot to do with this lawsuit. Because that book really is a history of law, in a sense. In the first 100 pages of it, the main figure in the book is not Roger Williams, who was really sort of the father of the modern idea of separation of church and state. The major figure was his mentor, a guy named Sir Edward Cook. Now, I doubt that any non-lawyer in the room ever heard of Edward Cook. And a lot of lawyers in Louisiana probably never heard of him because we have civil law here. But every American over the age of 5 has heard of Cook's most famous ruling from the bench. He was the Chief Justice of England, probably the greatest Chief Justice in history. And what he said was, the house of everyone is as his castle. And he said it 400 years ago, almost exactly, when you had lords with private armies and great castles. And what he was saying, that when it comes to the law, that great lord is no different than the lowest commoner in England living in a mud hut. Everybody is equal before the law. And what we have now is an industry that is so arrogant that it thinks it's above the law. that it can go into a state legislature
Aren't you gonna get your bill of?
when there's a lawsuit that has already been filed and intervene and kill that lawsuit.
The presenter tonight is Leo Broders.
We got better speaker system.
Yeah, they do have better speakers.
That bad?
Oh, cool. That's the benefits of having a scientist. Okay, so anyway, you got my point. You know, how can anybody, whether they think the lawsuit is a great idea, whether they think it's a terrible idea, and I can understand there can be people of you know, principle and of goodwill who think it's a bad idea. I think they're mistaken, but not everybody is simply a political toady who disagrees with the lawsuit. I wouldn't say that. I think there's even one of the new members of the levee board, I think, may be a perfectly good person and a good engineer and disagrees with the lawsuit. But how you can be in favor of the legislature going in and killing a lawsuit instead of leaving that to the legal system after it's already been filed, that I don't get. And if I thought through this, I'd probably have a better close than that or better punctuation, but I don't. So that's the end, but I'm, you know, plenty of time to answer questions. Thank you.
And the legislature.
The question was, can the legislature do that? There is a precedent. About 15 years ago, the city of New Orleans had a lawsuit against the gun manufacturers on liability, and the state passed a law that said it could, only the state could sue under these various provisions. And it did, the state Supreme Court did uphold that law and knocked out the lawsuit. So it's conceivable. Frankly, the Supreme Court is different now than it was then. If this went back up there on a question like this, it's possible that decision would be overturned, but I wouldn't count on it. You know, stopping the effort in the legislature, I think, is the most important thing to do.